It is a beautiful, peaceful day. I'm loving it. Storms are brewing. I don't know if you can hear that thunder in the sky, so I'll try to keep this short, but even though it's a beautiful, peaceful day, there are still storms brewing. In the last 24, 36, 48 hours or whatever, a few things have happened that are probably worthy of your attention. Number one, of course, is Morgan Stanley. Morgan Stanley, just this morning, announced that their high net worth wealth advisors are now greenlit to start promoting the Bitcoin ETF for their high net worth and ultra high net worth families. This means now, for the first time, a big bank officially has thousands, if not tens of thousands of financial advisors and wealth managers now officially promoting the Bitcoin ETF for their high net worth people, right? So far, we're about, 6 months or so into the approval of the Bitcoin ETFs. Clear data shows that it's been mostly retail demand and excitement for the Bitcoin ETFs. My personal guess is that this is from Bitcoin people that have funds in their retirement accounts that are allocating a portion of their funds within retirement programs to Bitcoin. That's my guess, but this is a really big deal because now we have Morgan Stanley going out and finding new clients, new wealth managers, current millionaires, multimillionaires, and decamillionaires, right? And those people, of course, have a lot more money than the average Bitcoin nerd that's in their basement or pajamas talking about how Bitcoin's gonna take over the world or whatever, right? So this is a big deal. This is in a similar way to Donald Trump or Kennedy just last week at the Bitcoin conference, kind of admitting political defeat and transitioning over to Bitcoin. Now we have this big bank, right, Morgan Stanley, basically saying, yeah, okay, now we're going to start promoting Bitcoin to our clients, right? Is this going to manifest overnight? We're going to have a vertical green candle? Probably not. But what this does mean is that we're probably going to have, over the coming months, quarters, year or two or so, we're going to have more and more of these high net worth families take a 1%, 3%, 10%, whatever percent allocation to Bitcoin within their funds, right? Now, this is going to take a long time. It's going to compound over a long time. However, it's probably going to add up in a very, very big way and manifest in shrinking Bitcoin supply. Now, the second big thing that has happened, and is the storm brewing, metaphorically, that I'm talking about, is what the Federal Reserve has said in the last couple days here. Jerome Powell has strongly hinted that we're going to begin cutting rates soon. We're going to revert back to monetary easing soon. Unemployment data is not looking that great. Certain indicators are going off, and each indicator has its own trade-offs and nuances and all that, and I'm not going to get into that because that's not what matters. What matters is the Federal Reserve is concerned that jobs very ominous, spooky thunder. The Federal Reserve has basically been saying, hey, unemployment doesn't look that great. We might need to start cutting rates soon, perhaps as soon as September or October this year in 2024. And if history is of any lesson, the Federal Reserve doesn't like cutting rates unless they absolutely have to, unless there's some sort of recession or event or whatever. Now, is it wise to try to time the market here, whether you're in real estate, Bitcoin stocks, any asset? No, I do not think it is wise. Bitcoin crashed 60% within 48 hours during the COVID crash of 2020, okay? And I'm saying that to emotionally prepare you for potentially what could be happening, right? Okay, again, the Federal Reserve is basically hinting that the next 3 to 6 months or so perhaps could be the most volatile months in the economy, the stock market, and everything, in America since COVID times, right? Recessions, or if recession, not whatever, I don't care. I don't have a strong prediction. But what I am saying is that if there is going to be a recession, if there is going to be some sort of credit event where the Federal Reserve, per Jerome's hints the other day, is going to have to start cutting rates, be prepared for volatility, right? Like I said, Bitcoin fell 60% within 2 days back in 2020. That was very scary for a lot of people. It was very concerning for a lot of people. However, it's important to remember that within 6 weeks, Bitcoin was back to its previous price levels, right? During the largest historical event so far of the 21st century, during the massive lockdowns of the pandemic, government-induced lockdowns, of those lockdowns of 2020, the single most economically significant event of the entire 21st century, I would argue even more significant than the Great Financial Crisis. Yes, the Great Financial Crisis was bad, but we didn't shut down the global economy for 3 to 6 months, right? Despite that, Bitcoin price recovered within 2 months or so, right? And so that's my encouragement for today, right? If we have some sort of recession, if the Federal Reserve is correct in their hints, and we do have some sort of crash, be aware that probably the reaction to that crash, not just in Bitcoin, but in real estate and stocks and everything else, the reaction to it is probably going to be bailing out that crash, and then some with stimulus, with printed money, right? So my point is, not only do we have Morgan Stanley now officially having thousands, if not tens of thousands, of high net worth families and financial advisors pushing those families into a Bitcoin allocation, 1%, 5%, 10%, doesn't matter. Even a 1% is significant. If we have that on the supply side, sucking supply away, and then simultaneously on the demand side, we have the Federal Reserve creating more political currency, lowering interest rates, and doing all this to potentially bail us out of some sort of credit event or recession or whatever could possibly happen. That's just something to keep in mind. We have not been in this scenario for years, okay? Bitcoin has gone from, in 2021, $65,000 per Bitcoin being hype mania in 2021. Now, $65,000 per Bitcoin in 2024 is no longer hype mania. I'm telling you, we are not in hype mania, okay? This is nothing like it was in 2021. Sentiment is dead. All the metrics are dead. People don't care about Bitcoin right now. People are procrastinating Bitcoin. They're procrastinating Bitcoin self-custody. They're procrastinating all these things. Yeah, there's a little bit of interest because of the whole Trump-Kennedy, whatever fiasco at the conference last week, but that's minimal, okay? That's minimal, okay? Nothing like 2021. And my point is that we are a few years later, $65,000 in 2024 is a little less than what it was worth 3 years ago in 2021, maybe something like $55,000 or $50,000 or so, right? Like a 10, 15, 20%, whatever devaluation of the dollar. But whatever the case, now looking forward to the next 12 months, we have the first bank out of many more banks to come starting to push Bitcoin to their clients, number one. And number two, we have potentially the next increase in global monetary supply. Global M2 money supply stock in the last week or so has, for the first time in 3 years, broken its sideways chop. We had a massive increase in 2020 with massive stimulus. We've been flat for 3 years. All the inflation we've seen and everything, even today, right? Prices in 2024 are higher than they were in 2023. Okay, the money we printed of the M2 supply stock we increased in 2020 still was having rippling effects all the way out 3-4 years later, now in 2023, 2024. And we could be, not guaranteeing, what do I know, but based on what the Federal Reserve has been hinting at, we could be looking at yet another wave of interest rate reductions, as well as looser monetary policy. Is it going to be like the ZIRP era, with zero interest rate policy era? Is it going to be like that? No, probably not, but probably they will be willing to revert to lower interest rates and more stimulus if there was some sort of recession, jobs crisis, or something else in an election year that was deemed as essential, deemed as really important, right? So it's very interesting that yet again, not only in 2020, but now in 2024, we have this kind of trifecta. We have the halving year that just reduced the amount of Bitcoin being mined from 900 to 450 a day, number one. Number two, we have potentially the first increase in money supply, also ironically the same year as an election year, as the same year as tightening interest rates. You know, is this all guaranteed? No, obviously not. Am I pretending to know what's going to happen? No, obviously not. Is it possible that Bitcoin could fall 30%, 40%, 60% within 2 days? Yes, absolutely. That is entirely possible. Okay, if we had a 50% crash, let's say 50%, right? You know, market's a little bit bigger. You know, now we're over $1 trillion for the asset. You know, maybe now we're looking at 50% drop, right? Let's say worst case scenario, we have another 3 to 6 month total economic shutdown for whatever reason, right? Pandemic, war, cyber security shutdown, whatever, cyber war, who knows, whatever. If we had a 50% fall within a couple days, that means we could be looking at, $30,000, $35,000 Bitcoin or so, right? And then we get back up to $70,000 or so within 6 to 8 weeks or so, right? From a percentage perspective, that's what we could be looking at. So we should be emotionally prepared for that, right? If you're not emotionally prepared for that, you should seriously consider how much money you have in Bitcoin. But do I think that's the most probable scenario? No. Even if that happens, do I think you're going to be accurate in timing the bottom? No. I had an excellent conversation with my friend Brad Mills back in March. He is a Bitcoin OG. He's one of the most prominent Bitcoin people out there. Super smart guy, excellent beard. And he correctly predicted the COVID crash in 2020. He correctly predicted it, okay? And most people didn't predict it, right? I surely didn't predict him. You know, most people didn't predict it, right? He successfully predicted the crash, but yet he still was not able to time the bottom because the bottom of the crash was so brief that he was not able to do it correctly, right? And so did he make a little bit of money? Sure. But by his own admission, it was not worth the time or the stress associated with that, right? And so my point is, you should be prepared for Bitcoin to go down a little bit, right? It might go down to 50K, 40K, whatever, maybe even 30K if we have a big recession or crash like the Federal Reserve is hinting with these stormy clouds potentially ahead in the near future. However, the perpetual upside is always higher. It's always an asymmetric bet to the upside as opposed to the downside. And so if you're willing to wait long enough, those odds are going to be in your favor, right? It's the same thing with gambling at a casino, right? Going to a casino, the odds are asymmetrically downside against you. And so, yeah, you might win a little bit, you might win a little bit more and more and more, but play the game in a casino long enough, and eventually the asymmetric odds against you are going to play out, and you're going to lose the majority of your money, right? But with Bitcoin, it's the opposite, because it's always the same number of coins, so it's always a fixed supply, and because there is always perpetually more demand by more humans being born, more economics, more productivity being created, right? More adoption perpetually forward in the future, you know, more everything in the future, right? If you believe that humans are going to make more and humans are rational on a long enough time scale, not on short time scales, then you should believe that the asymmetric opportunity is perpetually in your favor, right? No matter if it's $6 per Bitcoin, 6 cents per Bitcoin, $60,000 per Bitcoin, or $6 million per Bitcoin, right? And this is something important to keep in mind, right? Just last week, Michael Saylor on stage, you know, in Bitcoin Nashville was laying out the case for him being a trillionaire within 20 years or so, right? Basically, you know, Michael Saylor was giving the example of how by, let's say, the mid-2040s or so, in terms of today's current purchasing power, today's current dollars, Bitcoin could be $13 million or so per coin, and that would still only be 7% of global wealth, of global assets, right? Does real estate have value? Yes, it does. Does stocks have value? Yes, surely they do. Does even fiat political currency have value? Maybe you could even argue it does in certain circumstances when compared to other things, but ultimately, is Bitcoin only worth 7% of all these other assets combined? I don't think so. I think it's worth much more than that. But even if we're conservative, in terms of 2024 dollars, that's still $10, $12, $15 million per Bitcoin, right? If we actually want to talk in nominal terms, right, we're probably going to print at least twice as many, if not 3 or 4 times as many dollars by the mid-2040s, unless you're, you know, maybe even like me, even more pessimistic than that. But even just a 3 or 4x in the number of political currency units in the next 20 years, all of a sudden, you know, a $50 million, $100 million Bitcoin is not that absurd. And we're still less than 10% of global assets 20 years from now, right? Does that make sense to me? Yes, surely it does. Am I saying this is the end of all fiat, we're going to hyperinflate and go to zero collapse? Yeah, it's definitely possible. It's definitely possible. Never say it's impossible, right? Germany, when they had hyperinflation in the 2020s with the Weimar Republic, they were the world's 5th largest economy, right? Okay, we've seen this many times before. China has had hyperinflations in the historical past, despite them being the world's largest empire. It's entirely possible for the world's largest empire to have hyperinflation, to have some sort of monetary collapse. It is entirely possible. It's very unlikely for that to happen without also some sort of major default or war, so I hope and pray that doesn't happen. But what my point is that you don't have to be a relentless pessimist with political currency or relentless optimist with Bitcoin. You just have to look at the facts staring you at the face. And the fact is that $65,000 today in 2024 does not buy what it used to buy in 2021, right? So technically we're a bit lower compared to the previous all-time than you probably expect, number one. Number two, the fact is staring at the face that Kennedy on stage talked about openly the idea of the United States of America buying 4 million Bitcoin for a long-term treasury strategy. Cynthia Lummis is, you know, proposing a bill for the United States to hoard 1 million Bitcoin. That's another fact staring you at the face. There's only 1.7 million Bitcoin left on exchanges. That's a fact staring you at the face. There are 70 million millionaires in the world. That's a fact staring you at the face. And you begin to realize, wait a second. Let's say out of the 1.7 million Bitcoin on exchanges, 1 million of them are bought, right? Maybe that's from billionaires. Maybe that's from the United States. Maybe that's from China trying to beat the United States and outcompete them. You know, whomever it is, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. If there's only, let's say, 700,000 coins on exchanges, and let's say the 70 million millionaires in the world, forget the other 5 billion adults, 5.5 billion adults, if just the 70 million millionaires realize, wait a minute here, 700,000 coins on exchanges, 70 million millionaires like us, that means there's only 0.01 Bitcoin per millionaire. 1% of one Bitcoin per millionaire. See, right now, most people's unit bias is to Bitcoin. They think they're too late to Bitcoin because they can't get one whole Bitcoin. They think that, oh, Bitcoin can't go possibly higher because it's already $60,000 a coin. And I remember back when it was $1,000 or $10,000 or $10, whatever, they had their personal anchoring bias, whatever they think it was. And they realized, wait a second, there's only 1% of one Bitcoin, 0.01 Bitcoin per millionaire. Forgetting the billionaires, forgetting the 400,000 ultra high net worth people, forgetting the 300 million companies and corporations in the world, then you start to think to yourself, what about all these pension funds or all these companies? What about everyone else? Even if they only want a small percentage allocation to Bitcoin, you begin to realize that maybe my unit bias should not be arbitrarily one Bitcoin. Maybe my unit bias arbitrarily should be 1 million sats. Maybe my personal stacking goal should be 1 million sats or 10 million sats or 50 million or whatever your personal stacking goal is. My point is, it doesn't matter. My encouragement is get off zero because, as Michael Saylor says, you want to own the thing that the billionaires in 10 years are going to want to buy from you, right? You should do your homework and figure out what are the wealthy people of tomorrow, of the future, going to desire. What is the asset they are going to want? My personal conviction is that that is Bitcoin. Why Bitcoin? Because Bitcoin is electricity money. Because what are the AIs going to want? The AIs are not going to want to be paid in NVIDIA stock. The AIs are not going to want to be paid in trees, right? The AIs are going to want to be paid in the thing that is exchangeable for the thing they need to survive, which is electricity. What is the one global commodity that is exchangeable for electricity, that has a 24/7 electrical cost, that is infinitely divisible and finite? Obviously, that's Bitcoin, right? Bitcoin is electricity money. And if you believe the future of humanity is increasingly digital, increasingly electric, increasingly computational, then you probably should buy a fraction of the algorithm that's going to denominate all that electricity of the future, right? And if you don't believe me, that's okay. I actually care much less if you're quote unquote converted to Bitcoin or not. I care much more about just telling you, so I don't have a, unclear conscience in the future, right? I care much more about telling you what I believe the truth is than actually converting you to the truth, right? I just want you to know so that down the line, you don't ask me, why didn't you try to tell me, right? And so that's my encouragement. Do what you want, but ultimately, we do have stormy clouds ahead, as I've alluded to. The Federal Reserve might have to cut rates. We might have a recession. We might have a big collapse, right? Just the last couple of days here, we've had the biggest stock market declines in the United States since 2020, right? People are scared because, hey, Federal Reserve's hinting at, cutting rates. That might mean, economic turmoil on the horizon or the short-term horizon, right? My point is, it doesn't matter, right? Because even if there is that turmoil, what will human beings do if you give human beings the opportunity to bail themselves out of an economic crisis? They're going to do that every single time. We will print into an economic crisis forever. We will lower rates into an economic crisis forever, even if the system is increasingly unstable, even if every time we lower interest rates, they are less effective. We will continue taking the cocaine until we overdose or until we forego the cocaine and become abstinent, right? And the reality of human nature is that we will not do that voluntarily. The only way out of the addiction for us collectively as a society is to ultimately overdose, right? And so that is the hope with Bitcoin, right? Bitcoin is the water. Bitcoin is the economic life, let's say, that we are going to increasingly allocate to, increasingly consume to hopefully purge our system of these drugs, right? And so my encouragement, my hope for all of you, is that cutting through all this noise of Morgan Stanley adopting and the Federal Reserve this, stock market crashing that, this and that, the other, just understand that at the end of the day, there's less than 1 million Satoshis, less than 0.01 Bitcoin per millionaire on the planet. Forgetting the 1/3 of a billion corporations, forgetting the 500,000 or 40% of a million ultra high net worth individuals, right? Forgetting the 3 billion human beings that currently don't have economic prosperity because they're, currently impoverished, right? All of them, hopefully, we pray, are going to have more economic prosperity into the future. My point is, whichever way you want to think about this, whatever your personal frame of view is, understand there's only so much Bitcoin. And if more and more people understand the game theory of Bitcoin, they're going to enter the game of Bitcoin and want to acquire as much Bitcoin for themselves, right? We're going to transition from the ancient world where we hoard land and lakefront property, real estate, and gold into a future world where we hoard something that stores our purchasing power that doesn't have the side effect or the cost of increasing the cost of living for other people. This is the current problem we have. Humans need something to hoard to store energy in the future. Right now, we do it with real estate and oil and gold and food. But in the future world, no longer in the ancient world, but in the future world, we just do that with a digital made-up token backed by electricity we call Bitcoins, right? That's the future world where we don't, the negative consequence of our inherent need to store purchasing power in the future does not have the undesirable side effect of making housing and food more expensive for hundreds of millions, if not billions of people around the world. So that's my encouragement. Get off zero, buy some Bitcoin, hold for the long term, hold for the volatility. This is why I talk about unit bias, so that if Bitcoin does crash 20, 30, 50% for a couple hours or a couple days or weeks, that you understand that either it's going to survive or it's not, right? Either Bitcoin's going to survive the next 20 years, remain decentralized and secure, or it's not. Either it's going to zero, or it's probably going to tens of millions of dollars in real terms, 2024 purchasing power, or hundreds of millions of dollars in nominal terms in USD future purchasing power. Ultimately, whatever the case is, just have a long time preference and don't worry about it. Smash buy Bitcoin, ignore the scary thunderstorms, and wait 20 years, right? Up, down, sideways, whatever. Doesn't matter.